Welcome to What in the Smut podcast,
where the books are horny and so are we. I'm Elle and I write fantasy smut.
and I'm Kay and I write contemporary smut.
And this week in the Smutverse, we have a plethora of books published about minority groups, but not by minority groups, and the blurry lines therein. First off, we have the disturbing tale of a right-wing white man who just self-published a book about a 12-year-old girl who was enslaved in 1800s New Orleans, who was purchased by and eventually married to a slave owner. Just, wow.
I saw this earlier in the week and sent the link to Elle, and she's like, we can't read that. I'm like, well, no kidding. No kidding. I have no interest in reading this, but this should definitely be in the Smutverse news because this is outrageous.
Absolutely insane. I don't know that I want to call it out specifically. Like, I don't want to call attention to it. But yeah, if you want to learn more about that, we're not going to call out the novel's name and give it more attention. But Nika's Book Nook on Threads had a great conversation about it, if you would like to check that out. We also have a book releasing at the end of the month written about a white woman making assumptions about her indigenous neighbors. And despite the, quote, great awareness and care touted by the summary, the reviews indicate that this work was full of white savior tropes and harmful stereotypes. Indigenous people came out in droves across social media to condemn the book and the publisher for trying to capitalize on a very real crisis by releasing this book the week before the day of recognition of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. But here's where things get a little bit less cut and dried. An author got questioned at an event about why her main character is Latin American. And she was put in a position where she had to explain and defend that although she has a white last name, she was born and raised in Uruguay and eventually married a white man. Authors who write LGBTQIA+ characters have sometimes been forced to out themselves before they were ready due to backlash for writing about a community that readers didn't believe they belonged to. So, it is important now, more than ever, as technology and politics and social issues are advancing and regressing and twisting violently all around us, to apply critical thinking to the media you're consuming. What is the purpose of the narrative? What is it trying to convince you of? And perhaps, most importantly, who stands to gain from your shifting opinions? We spend a lot of time on this podcast breaking down stories that could easily be dismissed as frivolous, but that does not necessarily make them thoughtless.
Well put.
Thank you. On that note, let's turn to a book that gave us a healthy dose of discrimination with our monster fucking. Okay?
This week, we are talking about the viral Morning Glory Milking Farm by C.M. Nascosta. So the synopsis says, Violet is a typical down-on-her-luck millennial, mid-20s, overeducated, and drowning in debt on the verge of moving into her parents' basement. When a lifeline appears in the form of a very unconventional job in neighboring Cambric Creek, she has no choice but to grab at it with both hands. Morning Glory Milking Farm offers full-time hours, full benefits, and generous pay with no experience needed. There is only one catch. The clientele is grade A certified prime beef with the manly, meaty endowments to match. Milking minotaurs isn't something Violet ever considered as a career option, but she's determined to turn the opportunity into a reversal of fortune. When a stern, deep-voiced client begins to specially request her for his milking sessions, maintaining her professionalism and keeping him out of her dreams is easier said than done. Violet is resolved to make a dent in her student loans and afford name-brand orange juice, and a one-sided crush on an out-of-her-league minotaur is not part of her plan. Unless her feelings aren't so one-sided after all. Morning Glory Milking Farm is a short human monster romance novel featuring a high-heat, slow burn with a lot of heart and a guaranteed happily ever after. It's the first book in the Cambric Creek monster romance series and can be read as a standalone. I think in terms of like synopses,
Yeah.
that we've
Synopses.
that we've read so far. This is a really good one.
I agree. I think this does a great job of like teasing what we're dealing with here without giving too much away. It sets the stage very well.
And it's not cringy either. Some of them can be a little cringy. This is a pretty good one.
I completely agree. In terms of smut scale rating, I think this is pretty firmly at level 2. Hump in the night, because despite the fact that we are dealing with a human and a monster, there's only 2 participants, and the sex is very straightforward. It's pretty vanilla, all things considered. Certainly he's well endowed, and I think there's probably a little bit more fixation on his semen than I would normally call vanilla.
That is quite literally the whole point of the book, so
I agree, which is why I'm slotting it at level 2.
So this is actually also a pretty sweet romance.
Mm-hmm.
So the content warnings are not necessarily huge trigger warnings this time around. They include cock milking, non-human anatomy, size difference, and a lot of fluid. And that, I think, is probably the biggest trigger warning on here, is a lot of fluid.
Correct.
And it had me thinking about it way more than I ever want to ever again.
Oh my god, yes. I could not agree more. But before we get into that, let's talk about our reviews. There's a 4-star on Amazon that calls it fun, sweet, sexy, and odd. Why does this Minotaur actually check all the boxes? Lighthearted, easy read, lots of smut with an actual plot, which I wasn't expecting.
A 1-star calls this a train wreck.
We're getting both ends of the spectrum right off the bat.
It says, oh my god, this is the book version of a car accident that you can't look away from. I had to read on a dare, and it was time that I will never get back. LOL. I think that I can kind of agree with the car wreck that you can't look away from. Like, you start with that like curiosity, and then you're like kind of get roped into it.
Yeah, I could see that. We've got a 3-star on Goodreads that said, the world, delightful. 24 ounces of bull semen? Not so much. This, I could have ghost written this review. This is my review.
There's 2 1-stars. There's a lot of reviews for this one today because there were 2 1-stars from Goodreads that like I had to put. One of them says, I think I'm lactose intolerant now. And the other one says, this book could kill a Victorian child. And then lastly,
deceased, frankly,
it's so funny.
This book could kill me.
We will leave it off with a 5-star before we really get into it that says, oh my god, I did not expect to love this, especially with that cover and title. It's a monster romance with a minotaur. The writing was great, although it does switch between past and present a bit much, and the romance was so sweet and hot. The way he loves spoiling her and his filthy mouth, chef's kiss. I love the concept of this monster world and can't wait to read more already. And actually, I remember now why I chose this. It's because of though it does switch between past and present a bit much, a lot of the reviews mentioned this and how it's difficult to figure out
what's happening right now versus what happened in the past. I agree. That's one of my main criticisms as well.
All right, so we ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's jump in. I would love to kick this off with, I immediately thought of the gay T-Rex law firm when this book kicked off.
So did I have a note.
Was it, this place's hiring practices seem much more thorough? Because
it is something, I said much better onboarding process than the law firm.
Yes. Yes, that was like all I could think of through. I think like it's like the entirety of like chapter 1. I think it might just be the entirety of chapter 1.
Yeah.
But essentially we first meet Violet. She's sitting at home and she's watching a recording of the training video for the Morning Glory milking farm. And this is, we're already kind of jumping back and forth between present and past, between like her on site the day before and her time looking at the training video this evening.
It did take me some reading, like rereading, to try to figure out, like, because there's no page breaks or font change to express that she's thinking about something that happened before, or like it's a flashback and then back to the present. So, and this is pretty consistent throughout the whole book.
Yes, it is. I would say it is its biggest flaw. And I mean that sincerely, despite the fact that we're talking about a monster romance. Like, it is overall, we're going to get into, like, the world that was built here, the relationship between the main character and the male hero. Like, it all works so well, I think, personally. But following the story is surprisingly difficult sometimes because it's hard to tell when you're in the moment and when you're in the past. But all of which is to say, basically the high level is that this is a shall we say, parallel universe where mythological creatures are real. And there are mostly, I think it's pretty implied throughout the story that regular humans are the majority, and that mythological creatures and communities oftentimes have little pockets or isolated communities, or end up kind of in a somewhat untenable position of living like in a rural area near human towns or homes, and that has some underlying tension.
Yeah, I agree. So like she grew up, she's human, so she grew up in a very like human suburbia. So grew up very sheltered, and that's kind of referenced quite a bit, especially when we get conversations with her mom. But then we also kind of get more information, like where she's going for work, Cambric Creek, is much more of a humans are the minority, because it's become one of those where all of these mythological beings are coming and congregating together and creating this community, which she's realizing is like really cool to see all of these different, I guess we can call them races. I mean, species sounds like a little bit, I know that they're animals, but like species sounds a little bit wrong in this situation. So like,
I agree.
All of these different cultures and I guess races of these mythological creatures are all living in harmony. And she's kind of getting to see that as somebody that only saw humans before.
Right. And she lives in, I can't remember the name of the big city, but she basically moved away from home. She got like a city planning master's degree or whatever. And this was like, I think this is also covered in the first chapter, where you kind of get that, I would call it a very classic millennial kind of trajectory. Sure. I mean, and not all of us got into a field and then discovered that like our field now requires not just a bachelor's degree, but a master's degree. But I have many friends who did.
Like my communications degree? I am a millennial with a communications degree and then a teaching master's.
There it is. So Kay definitely
quite honestly,
identified.
I have a lot of notes throughout this that are like, I feel like I'm being attacked, and also I feel like I'm being psychoanalyzed throughout this novel, because it like hit me hard in some of these cases.
So hard. So she goes to college, she moves to the big city, she ends up discovering that her like civic design, city planning, career aspirations require a master's degree. She gets a master's degree, and now she is, I think she had like a part-time gig that
it almost
did not end up getting picked up
sounded
full-time.
Like it was like a paid internship or like a grant position that it was a grant position that ended up the grant ran out and they just didn't have the space for her, despite the fact that they like loved having her work there and she was great at her job. It just, again,
the funding was no longer
very
there.
millennial.
So millennial. So upsettingly real. So yes, if you do read fiction to escape real life, I don't know if this book will actually be for you.
Especially if you're in your 30s.
Yes. Oh my God, it hurts so badly. But yes, so Violet is at this point where her mother is very concerned and supportive of the idea that her daughter, who lives in the big city, that she doesn't like, she is very nervous about the big city, and she's worried about Violet's safety, which I very much identified with as someone who moved from a rural area to a big city the moment I had my freedom. My sympathy went out to her, I guess is what I will say.
Well, I did have a quote here that says, her mother always seemed to know when to call, always knew when she was at her lowest and most vulnerable, always with an abundance of love, overflowing with compassion and eager to help, but always at the worst fucking times. And I said, this is always the way. Like, mom always knows when to call.
She can feel it.
Yes, it's that, like, tug of, I know my baby's in something right now. Let me call and check on her. But it's always when you're, like, you get that, like, are you okay? And you just cry.
And you're like, I cannot do this right now. Yes. So in this world in which we find ourselves, Violet finds a job listing. And it seems too good to be true, as our synopsis kind of hints. There's no experience needed, full-time hours, full benefits. You even get a note where she's like, it even has dental. And like, that one hit me so hard. I did not get dental insurance until like 5 years ago, maybe. Like, I'm in my 30s. Like, it is... Get it, girl. Like, good Lord. Anyway, and so the Morning Glory Milking Farm is hiring, and it is a pharmaceutical supplier, we'll say. But essentially, the quote that I have here, that human men placed an enormous importance on their dicks, was no surprise to her. The whole world seemed to be designed for cocks after all. And then it kind of goes on a list of the modern day things that we know to be true about design for men versus for women. But learning the lengths to which pharmaceutical companies were willing to go to ensure the production of those erection-enhancing little blue pills didn't slow, however, was eye-opening. Bull semen, specifically Minotaur semen, was a major component in giving the pills the oomph their devotees needed. And she, in her new role, if she decided to take the job, would be responsible for collecting it. Wild.
Yeah, like, so creative.
Incredibly
like, to come
creative.
up with something like that is so creative.
It's genius.
Yes. So she's working. So the milking farm is like a subsidiary of Fizzle Pharmaceuticals, like Pfizer, Pfizzle. So that was hysterical. And then you find out that they're making Viagra with Minotaur semen.
bull semen.
So she's watching these like videos, kind of like till she's applied, she's kind of been offered the job, and this is like a little bit more for her to decide if she wants this position. So she's like,
which is also like, for a company like this, it's like a perfectly reasonable way to be like, here, like, you come onto the facility, you get a tour, you talk about it, whatever, but like, here's the reality of doing this job. Here's the training video. Like, it is up to you to decide if this will be a good fit for you. And like,
that's great. Also, though, I feel like for something like this, again, we're going to take this like way more seriously than it is. But for something like this, they're probably trying to protect themselves from like having to do the rehiring process over and over and over again. For somebody to be like, I can't do this, and then quit 2 days later just for them to have to fill the position again. Like, that makes sense.
Correct.
So she's horrified by these videos. And at one point, she's like saying how if she wasn't in her own house, she would be running out of here. And then says, is that what you want for the last thing that sweet old woman, like her elderly neighbor, the last thing for that sweet old woman sees is some Minotaur getting a tug job? Get a fucking grip and make up your mind. I said, thinking about her elderly neighbor having to see this video that she watches is so funny.
It's incredible. Yeah, because she's in her apartment and she's like, I feel the need to flee, but if I left my door open, the woman who lives upstairs could stumble into my apartment, which has apparently happened before, and see this video, and it would absolutely kill her.
But also, it sets it up nicely for, like, how naive she is.
Yeah.
Because, like, she's very uncomfortable kind of with the whole concept of essentially jerking off minotaurs all day. That's what they're doing.
Yes.
But
that is what they're doing.
As someone that has come from an entirely human area, for this, like, she's intrigued, she's curious, but she's also kind of a little bit naive in that, like, maybe even, like, sexually naive, that she's, like, really kind of on edge about it.
Yes, she's very freaked out about it. And we'll get kind of a reference here once she unsurprisingly gets up the courage to accept the job and starts training. But the person who trains her is like, it's not sex work.
Yeah.
Like, this is not sex work, which, like, in and of itself is perfectly reasonable and perfectly fine. And that it is the oldest institution for a reason. But this particular job for the clinicians, we are not performing like a sexual act, you know, like, it's such an interesting topic of exploration, I feel like, to kind of like delve into the difference between, as if a line needed to be drawn here, but like between collecting semen and sex work. And that's why I think it's interesting that we do get one of the clients of the farm becomes the love interest, because like you get that distinction very clearly of like how she feels when he's there versus when any of the other clients are there. It's very interesting.
I agree. So she decides to take the job.
She does. It's hard to argue with the pay, the benefits, the lack of training required, and the alternative, as we've discovered, is that her parents want her to move into the space above the garage.
Yeah.
And she could have her own little, like, sweet apartment thing in her parents' house. And, oh, wouldn't you know... that your high school sweetheart was recently divorced. I just saw him in town. And it's just like, I could not have empathized more with Violet in that moment of like, you know what? I absolutely would rather jerk off minotaurs every day than go back to my hometown.
I I hear you. So in these videos that she's watching, I have, quote, she wondered, watching as the technician moved her oiled hands in a continuous twist down the rigid shaft, if the men in the video had been specifically chosen as displays of the finest minotaur meat available, and considered that reality might not match up with the glossy media the same as it rarely did with human men. And there were, like, some descriptions that were, like, too in-depth.
Could not agree more.
What they looked like and the actual actions. Like, in some cases, if it's not supposed to be a sexual act, like, the description was too much in that way, where, like, it kind of confuses it confused me a little bit, and I'm like, this is not supposed to be a sexual, like, this is not supposed to be a turn on,
right?
Because she's working and it's supposed to be clinical, but like the way it's written is written to kind of excite you a little bit.
But I think that too, and maybe I'm giving more credit than is due, but I think that mostly happened in the beginning when she was kind of figuring out her stance on it, I guess. And so, like, I think it was confusing because she was confused about how sexual it was.
Yeah, so
because
it makes you,
in the beginning,
it makes you empathize with her a little bit more.
Yeah, that's my hypothesis. I'm sticking to it.
I trust you on these. You're always pretty good with them. So she cues up the video one last time before bed, and I'm like, this is like exposure therapy. Like, she's watching it on repeat. Like,
until she can memorize the exact moment when the instructor is gonna say something, and like when the bull is going to ejaculate. It's a whole exposure therapy is a good way of putting it.
So she shows up for her first day of work at the Morning Glory milking farm. Actually, on her drive there, I have a quote that says, she had arrived that morning with a twist in her guts and what felt like sand coating her tongue. The same sort of nausea-inducing anxiety she'd always suffered from with every new class, new club, new experience. The pressure of being a perfectionist, the unarticulated terror of not being an automatic expert. It would pass, she knew, but that never calmed her jangling nerves or settled her stomach at the time. I said, I feel both seen and attacked.
I was thinking the exact same thing. This paragraph reached out of this novel and grabbed me by the throat and was like, I see you, motherfucker.
For sure. Like, anytime you start something new, especially if it's something that's like out of your comfort zone, this is she articulated the words that I feel anytime I start something new. Or anytime I do something like
I know it's going to be fine. I know it's going to calm down. But right now, I am terrified. And I can't do anything about it. It was so good.
So she's also saying that, like, this is a nice place. She's seeing that there's families, there's kids, like parents with their kids, and they wouldn't have a business that wasn't completely on the up and up, operating right out in the open if this wasn't such a nice place. Like, this is not going to be a shady business because she's seeing that, like, this is a decent area. Like, they wouldn't have
something salacious and shady operating in full view of a town full of families.
Yes,
We also get I think, the first nod to the fact that even the city that she lives in is a little bit more segregated than she initially thought. She sees a family of moth people crossing the street, and she kind of mentions that there had been a Mothman who lived on her floor for a short period of time in her apartment, but he'd kept to himself, his giant eyes lowering on the rare occasion they'd passed in the hallway, and she'd never worked up the nerve to speak to him. And I think, like, that's probably our first glimpse into people who are not human try to make themselves smaller in majority human areas and try not to, impose and not to, like, not making eye contact, for example, is, like, an indication of, like, not wanting a confrontation. Yeah. And so, like, we'll start to get more and more explicit references to how the city kind of, like, feels for non-human residents. But there's just, like, it's such good descriptions. It's such a, like, I want to visit this town. It sounds delightful.
I knew that you would really like the world building aspect of this because it was really well done. Like, a lot of thought was really put into how these individuals all interact with so definitely it was the world building was really, really, really well done here. So then she's training now, so she's in the facility. She's training, she's getting trained by a woman named Kirami,
yes.
So she's being trained by Kirami, and she's showing her kind of what she needs to do. She's shadowing her, so she's seeing her, like, go through all the steps. We get kind of a cool description of what these, like, rooms look like that they're in, and it's like it's dual leveled, and the Minotaur comes in on the top level and basically like sticks their penis through a hole in a bench. So they're separated from the actual Minotaur, so they're kind of below them while they're doing this collection. So I do have a quote that says, Violet wondered as her hand reached out to lift one of the milking machine's nozzles if the Minotaurs would be able to see her below them as she worked, or if she would be completely hidden from view. And I said, I have had these same questions, honestly, as I'm reading this. And then at one point she says something about, like, a soda can, her fingers barely able to stretch around it. And I said, again, I know where this is going. Stop. Like, we've talked about this last week, the week before, pretty much every week, like, with how these giant penises, and then all of a sudden it feels good, and that's not ever going to be the case.
I feel like this one, when they actually have sex for the first time, they do reference that she feels it and it hurts a little bit for the first. Anyway, so we also get a little note that Violet's the only human at the facility. And she had initially thought that Kirimi was also human, but it turns out that that is not actually the case.
Do we ever find out what she is, though? It says something about antennas, and I was just picturing the ant from Bug's Life.
Oh, I was picturing a character from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay, I've never watched them,
because
but...
they're actually quite fun. I do recommend. But she is like the human featured, but her eyes are like fully black, and then she has little antennae right in the front, which felt like what was being described here, because Kirimi also has dark eyes that are wide and dark, a solid inky pupil that bled into an iris of the same color with no white sclera to break up the doll-like effect.
Oh, okay.
But so Violet is so type A. She's frantically scribbling notes in the margin of her training binder as Kirimi is talking. We get this reference here that she'd always been a frantic note taker in school, missing half the lecture in her haste to write down every single innocuous sounding detail, and found herself slipping back into the bad habit now in this strange place, in this strange town.
Did this hit you also?
I was like, could you stop? Could you stop attacking me so viscerally with each and every sentence? I am desperate for this to not harm me in this fashion.
Yeah, that should have been the trigger warnings.
Yeah, we should put that at the top.
The trigger is just being a millennial.
Oh my god, so true.
They finally, they get the first client of the day, and he says, well, you'd better train her up right. Give her a good demonstration of the proper technique. And the way he's saying it is kind of sleazy. And I said, This is the worst first client that she could have had. This is like sexual harassment or asking for a happy ending, even though I know, that's kind of what it is. But, asking for a happy ending at the end of a massage, it's so at odds with how the girl had tried to reassure her that it was not a sexual thing, and he's coming in and making it uncomfortable. And I feel like a lot of that, especially at the beginning, you're like, is it? I feel like really? HR needs to be called.
Yeah. Well, and so they do talk about that where they do have that mention later on where they start to give her kind of the full story, where they have the nicknames for the different types of clients. But it is mentioned, I don't know that it was mentioned more than once, but it's very clear that if a client makes you feel extremely uncomfortable, you mark him down and he's not allowed back.
Yeah, that's true.
Which I thought was a good note. They are
protecting their employees.
Yeah, someone mentioned they're this is a very tight run business, and they want their employees to be comfortable here. So I really liked that. This milking minotaur farm has better HR policies than almost every tech company I've ever worked at.
So the different types of clients that they have are earners, clock watchers, good little cows, and there I think is one more that they mentioned. But the earners, Kirimi says that those are the clients that can account for every drop. Literally, they can pull on their balls and calculate exactly what they'll be making for the day. It's wild. So when we talk about what they'll be making for the day, we're talking about the ounce count that's collected, and then it's logged. There's put on a conveyor belt or something, tagged, logged, and they get paid for how much they output. Now, this first earner that was being the sexual harassment kind of to start off the day, he's an earner, and it was 24 ounces. And this is not the most that we hear about. There's more than 24 ounces in some cases, and I can't process that.
No.
Especially as we get later on in the book. So, so think about like a Poland Springs water bottle plus another
Polar
half.
Springs, yeah. Plus another half.
So 1.5 Poland Springs water bottles is what is being. She's using her hands to try to figure out the amounts right now.
Do not attack me in this fashion. Okay, yeah. So it's a lot of liquid.
A lot. I mean, it's my 2 coffee cups. Like I do the 12-ounce button on my Keurig. It's 2 of those. That's a lot. Oh my God. That's a lot.
That's a lot of liquid. That's a lot of liquid.
So now she knows the difference between the earners and the clock watchers. The earners can figure out exactly to the penny how much they're going to make. The clock watchers usually come in like on a lunch break. They're businessmen or whatever. They're like in there for the quick cash, get in, get out, get on with it. And then the good little cows,
those are the ones
they
that
treat it a little bit more fetishy.
Experience.
Yeah, and they like they want it to be
milked like a dairy cow. Essentially.
So she says the coworkers she'd met so far were friendly and welcoming and eager to offer pointers, and she was grateful for their experience. And I said, this can make or break a shitty job for sure.
It absolutely can.
You like, she's doing this in the interim for figuring out how to pay her bills, and we've all been there at some point. So she's doing this to make the money, and good coworkers can absolutely turn that into something where you're like not miserable to go to work every day.
Yes, absolutely. And can become like your best friends in the whole world. You just get bonded by
absolutely. Absolutely.
But yes, the other type of client to be aware of, the good little cows, they really like to push the fantasy of being milked. It's a fetish thing for them, but they tend to be the very best tippers, so it's just something to tolerate. But the suits are serious about keeping everything professional, so if any client ever tries to push the envelope too far, you can end their session and report them, and they won't be welcomed back.
Yeah, so this is like, again, setting her up to be comfortable in what she's about to do.
Yes, because up until this point in this conversation, she has been watching Kirami do all of the collection, and she's soon to be on her own, or not on her own, but soon to be the one actually doing the collection under Kirami's supervision.
Right. She is gonna take the next client. She's never been under the table in the lead position before. She's nervous, obviously. And then, of course, I said, it says, his hooves scraped against the turf lining on the footrest as he settled himself into position, filling the opening in the bench with the thickest cock she'd ever seen, his wide hips sealing out the light completely. And then continues with, her hand was unable to span the circumference of him, obliging her to use both to slicken him with oil all the way to the tip, the head still shielded by his foreskin. And I said, well, he's got the biggest penis, so this must be our main character. Because it's not going to be the one with the smallest. That's unrealistic.
Our other hints are that this Minotaur was clearly one of the clock watchers.
Yep, he said he was on his lunch break.
Yep, he said he was on his lunch break. He was already stepping out of his well-tailored pants. He had a heavy watch face that he was looking at, a clear marking of the clock watchers. And she thinks to herself, maybe he'll be different. And of course, he is. The thing that I really liked about Violet, though, is that she has this almost like obsessive need to do a job well.
She does it well.
She does it. This is like a common refrain throughout the novel, and I do believe that it is the last line also. But like, it's something along the lines of, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And that kind of need to do a good job was something that I appreciated and felt attacked about, but it's fine. But I really loved the idea because I think in romance, it is very common to have a female main character who has never done sexual things before. And somehow is always very skilled at doing whatever the male main character would like her to do, whether that's blowjobs or hand jobs or sex in general. And I thought this was really interesting that she's clearly not a virgin. She's had experiences before this, but the fact that she had literal training and had watched it so much to be as good as she could possibly be, and like was dedicated to doing it the best that she could, has her like basically getting a reaction out of this client who is a typical clock watcher, which usually means that they aren't like affected by the sexual aspect of it at all. She's just like she performs above and beyond, and I thought that was very interesting that we had like an explanation for why she was so fucking good at hand jobs.
So I have the clock watchers almost never displayed any tells, never showed anything but impatience and stoicism, and she knew it was inappropriate to feel a thrill over forcing a reaction from him because he like groaned or something. And even less so to register that thrill directly between her thighs, a tingle that ignited when he repeated the motion. I said, so at what point does this become inappropriate? Because this was kind of making me uncomfy.
Yes.
This is like...
Most of the uncomfortable kind of like borderline shit that I feel like happens in this novel is like her perpetrating
and like...
Which is interesting.
It's interesting. It doesn't make it any better than if it was the guy. It just is like, I guess because it ends up being mutual later, that's okay. But like, I don't know.
I feel like this is, I think, depending on how you look at it, this could be any workplace romance where having inappropriate thoughts about a coworker and knowing that it's inappropriate and unprofessional and like having this deemed unrequited crush would be borderline in any kind of workplace.
Okay.
And even with a client, similar type of thing. Like if you're a barista and you get a regular who's like a little bit flirty and you like react to that and you like think about him later and, you know, whatever, like that's still thinking inappropriate thoughts about a client. I think it is extra uncomfy because she is touching his intimate parts during the service performed. But I think that there's a case to be made that any unrequited work crush could be deemed very inappropriate.
Yeah, that's true. I guess because it's a clinical setting, I'm seeing it almost in the like the doctor patient kind of
ethical question.
Like that.
I hear you.
Yeah, and I think that's why it makes me kind of really uncomfortable in this part.
Yeah.
And it definitely gets better. She does describe that his balls are gigantic.
I mean...
Each one was the size of a large orange.
Yes.
So she also, in the videos, it had shown, after the, like, mechanism was hooked up to them, the person doing the training video said like, I like to also continue to like
provide manual
play with
stimulation.
the balls essentially to like get things moving. And then at the end, warm cleansing wipes were used to remove excess semen from the client's dangling members. And I was like, love an aftercare moment, like
indeed.
So she finishes up and goes and collects what I'm assuming are tips. She gets envelopes at the like front desk on her way out, and in one of those envelopes is a crisp $100 bill. Yeah.
The perks of a job well done, eh, Violet?
So not only is she getting paid well, getting these great benefits, but also she's getting tips on top of it, which is
hell yeah,
get it.
Despite the unorthodoxy of the job itself, I feel like there was also a moment in here where she's like able to pay off her credit card bill. Like she's starting to have more than 2 digits in her bank account.
Of her labor, really.
Yes, But like it's like having that first real job, and like if you're privileged enough to get to that point where you start to feel comfortable,
yes,
like, and you're like, I am no longer living week to week, that feeling is hard to describe. It's hard to like articulate exactly that difference between like I'm scraping by or I'm making enough.
Yeah.
Right? Like that tipping point of like not quite being comfortable, not quite like having like a whole bunch of excess cash to throw around, but like being able to say like, I can buy that expensive latte.
Yes, I can treat myself and not feel guilty about it for the rest of the week.
And not have to go without something else, you know? Like,
she goes home and
is inappropriate.
Yeah,
for sure.
And like she masturbates to the thought of him.
Mm-hmm.
She realizes that this is inappropriate.
Correct.
But it doesn't really change anything.
No.
So then she's getting kind of into her groove, and there's been no repeat of the heat that had gripped her after her first solo run, not so much as a shiver of desire as she worked on client after client, bull after bull every day. So like it's important that the author included this, so we're not getting that she's like getting off on doing this job all the time, you know?
Right. Like it's clear that this particular client was different. And, like, it's not entirely clear until maybe later, I think, that it's not just because he was the first client either.
Right.
It's because they have a connection.
I wonder if Minotaurs have, like, fated mates.
I do wonder about this. Because it's actually, this was another thing that I found interesting that you don't see in romance very often. Is that our male main character is divorced.
Yes, that's definitely a trope that's not quite as common in romance.
Like it's like, I don't know, like you certainly never see it in Hallmark, for example. Yes. But I still feel quite rare to have a divorced male main character who's not a widower,
or a dad.
Who doesn't have a dad, yes, like he doesn't have a kid, or like that there was some like wrongdoing,
like he's not a scumbag.
Yeah, he's not a scumbag, or she's not a scumbag. Like where like I think I've read more often when there's like when he has a past, like the mom of his kids or whatever, if she's still alive, usually it's because like she ran off, or she like hung with a bad crowd, or like she cheated or whatever. Like usually there's like some justification
for why
a relationship came to an end. And I thought this book did a very good job of like not vilifying his ex-wife.
Absolutely. And also like normalizing the divorce aspect of it. Like,
like we grew apart. I was too busy working. We became different people than we were when we married. Like I thought it was very mature. It was a very good look at like the real world effects of how your situation changes, and as a result your relationship with your partner changes. And I thought also that Violet had a good view of, like, I think the words that she used were along the lines of, like, I can't even be mad at her for reinventing herself after the relationship. Because, like, she finds her social media
she
accounts.
fully stalks her.
Talk about a millennial. I
was going to say, I mean, we've done it. We've all done it.
We have all done it. Yes, you have done it. You listening, I know you have. At least once. You know where they live. You've seen their pictures. You've maybe done a drive by their house. Everybody's done it. Don't act like you're special. Everybody's done it. Okay, I don't know that I've driven by their house before.
You live in a city. You don't drive.
I have no counter argument to that.
So she's back at work, and the woman that's in charge of like their schedules or their clipboards for the day is like kind of giving Violet a hard time, saying you need to check these. You have a request. Don't you know this? You like stupid human kind of thing. She doesn't say that, but like she's being rude to her. And Kirami sticks up for her and goes, that's not her job. You know that that's not any of our jobs. It's your job to check.
That's
you didn't
your
catch
job.
it. Stop trying to blame this on her. And I said, I love a work friend that'll stick up for you, especially when you're new and like still figuring it out. Not letting anybody take advantage is really cool. I liked her a lot.
But yeah, so the result of this, though, is that she has a request in her stack of files, and she asks Kirami what that means, and Kirami replies that it means that a client put in a request at reception. It's just a request. It's not a guarantee. You won't get them very often. And like the key thing here that I thought was also a nice little touch was that clients don't know when each person is working.
Yes.
The company is not allowed to give out that information. There is no there's no expectation that you shift your schedule around for them. Like I thought there were just like some really nice attention to detail moments that indicated that this is designed to be a safe place to
and
work.
also like the clients' names are not on their clipboards. It's like their initials and their serial number, and they're really not supposed to talk about anything personal while they're in these rooms, and it really is separating the client from the employee,
the attendant.
So this kind of getting yelled at by the like charge person or whatever sets her off, and like she has an issue hooking up one of the machines, and the guy is like looking over the bench like, hey, does it need to go that way? You probably need to go in at an angle, sweetheart. And I'm like, this is so anytime a woman cannot do something, trivial as it may be, all of a sudden the men come in with this like, oh, well, did you try this? Yes, that's the first thing I tried. I'm not a fucking idiot.
Yeah, he says, you probably need to go in at an angle, sweetheart. And she goes, I am not needing the extra sugar baby sweetheart bullsplaining that day.
It was, again, I felt seen and attacked.
Yes, correct. I continue to be impressed by Nascosta because she really knows her millennial traumas.
Yes, I mean, for sure. She's probably in her 30s and also
she experienced it herself.
Probably graduated college at the peak of the recession. So, you know... So I did have that. The only constant had been the friendly understanding from the endless line of bullmen. The Minotaurs waved off her tardiness, assured her she was doing fine, and that bad days happened. I said this was actually really sweet.
Yes.
Like they're going in there and they know that she's still relatively new. So like, it's okay, it happens, whatever. Like, let's just move along.
I loved it. I thought it was like a nice little, I don't know, like the point, I think, is that this is a normal workplace, and most people, most clients or customers or whoever are reasonable and understanding. And every now and then you get one motherfucker that just ruins it for like the rest of the day. But that's not the norm.
Yes.
And I liked that.
She finally gets to her purple sticker. The request, and it is, as we thought, it might be her first ever client. So this quote, he asks like how her day's been going or whatever, and she says she'd not had a chance to appreciate his voice on that first day, as nervous as she'd been, but now the baritone resonance of it made her quake. Still on that unsteady shore, waves of anxiety forming foaming whitecaps, the crash of which would certainly send her off her feet. I was like, this is incredible.
It's
it was so good. Like, you really are feeling that. It was really good in a way that like makes you feel it without it being salacious yet, you know?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and it continues though, because then like she replies and she says, "I'm well. It's nice to see you again." And then Violet suffered a moment of heart-clenching panic, wondering if she'd broken some social contract of non-acknowledgement, but he only nodded, the scrutiny of his chocolate brown eyes pinning her to the spot, in danger of being overtaken by the undertow in her mind until she turned away, moving to set up her station. Like, just the...
It was good.
So
it was really good. He asks her if she's still in school, and she's like overthinking this. Again, I feel attacked. So she's overthinking it like, is he interested in me? And he wants to make sure that I'm like of appropriate age and not in school, or is he just trying to make small talk? Then she's like, no, I graduated grad school. I just got this job. So then they're having this like small talk, and and she says, "Fortunately, this place was hiring. I saw the ad at the perfect time." He goes, "They treat you well here?" And she goes, "They do. Very fair pay, full benefits. I couldn't ask for more." I said, this is hilarious small talk for the fact that she's about to jerk him off. Like,
I know. It's so good. It's so funny. Like, but again, it's like it serves to normalize like the job, I guess, because then he says, "That's good to hear. They're extremely generous to clients. It's a relief to hear they treat the employees well." And then he goes, "I suppose I should let you get started." Like, so, which also like brings it back around.
Also, he's also hard already, which was not the case the first time. And we learn later that like they're encouraged to kind of like get themselves started a little bit so that they're like, already almost fully hard, but not so.
It's almost considered polite
to like not
to make sure that the schedule gets maintained.
Yes. So he's already hard, and she's like, "Is he hard because like we've been talking? Like, did us just talking make him hard?" So again, she's thinking into way too much about this. She starts wondering as she's like working if this is what it would be like to be fucked by the big bull. And I said, she's getting herself all worked up, and I feel like she's not going to get the machine hooked up in time. That was not the case.
I also felt that. It seemed like she was getting distracted and was not going... One of the possibilities of this job is that you don't get the collection machine hooked up to the bull's penis in time, and thus semen will get everywhere, which does happen to her at least once, maybe twice during the course of the story. But the anxiety of her being distracted while this was happening, I was like, it's gonna
make a mess.
Oh no, it's gonna make a mess. And we know how I feel about being sticky.
I have a note in here actually at one point about, Elle's gonna hate this. But that's much later. So
I know exactly where your note is. I'm pretty sure.
So at one point, she thinks to herself, if Violet considered that between the two of them, they might flood the room, which was like, ooh, I didn't like that. And then
I didn't like that at all.
And then she thinks, what the fuck is wrong with you? Just finish him off and be done. I said, like, she's trying. I mean, I guess you have no control over your thoughts. You have control over your words and your actions. So, like, okay, she's making sure that she's like correcting herself, and she thinks that she shouldn't work on him anymore. She should ask what she needs to do or say so that she can make sure that he doesn't get in her rotation anymore. Obviously, this is not going to happen. Otherwise, this book would be over.
That's true.
So then she mentions to him that 30 minutes after the appointment time for today would be her last appointment for the day. So I don't really know what her intention was for telling him that.
Well, he asked
it when she's
because
done.
she said, because they basically had started the small talk with like, he asked how she was doing, and she was like, well, I've been behind schedule all day, and like, I'm hoping this is my second to last appointment, and I'm hoping that these last two go smoothly, essentially. And so then at the end, he says, one more after this, then the slot after this one is your last for the day. And she answers yes. And then she is more specific that it is 30 minutes after your appointment time for today would be my last spot of the day.
And he says, like, I'll have to take that into consideration or something along those lines. So, like, they're kind of flirting, which I kind of also love because, like, it's that, like, flirting where, like, it's innocent enough, but, like, you're kind of showing interest, and it gets you, like, that, like, kind of, like, giddy, whatever.
Makes you high-pitched.
So, yes. So, again, when she gets home, she thinks of the big bull with the messy hair as she retrieved her vibrator from her nightstand, trying to approximate the slow, deep, deliberate thrusts of his hips, and wondered if he would still be as assertive. And then it mentions that she's trying to imagine the mess 24 ounces would make of her sheets. And I said, oh my God, could you imagine?
I cannot imagine.
And I said she would need one of those, like, waterproof sex blankets for sure.
Yes.
And also, if any of those companies want to sponsor us, we we are open.
Oh my gosh, we are absolutely for sale for a very specific niche of companies.
Sponsorships, absolutely. So the next day, she gets coffee. She had to change her scrubs because the second client of the day couldn't get him hooked up fast enough. And she had to punch in the cleaning code. So, like, when that happens, she doesn't have to, like, mop up the mess. She has to, like, punch in a code to let, like, the janitorial team come and, like, whatever.
And deal with it. So the only mess she has to deal with is whatever got on her.
Right. So she has to go change her scrubs. And it said, like, the bull had been younger than the normal clientele, and it was, like, his first time, whatever.
Yep.
So she's on the phone with her mom, and this is where her mom says, Carson from up the street, well, he just moved home. His mother was telling me how happy she is to have him home while he gets back on his feet after the divorce, you know. He grew up to be very handsome. And I'm like, oh my God, I've, like,
had this exact conversation.
Yes. Like,
Yep.
So maybe the next time you're home for a visit, you two could go for coffee and catch up. I said, this is the most mom thing ever. And, like, I know that I'm also going to end up being guilty of this later on in life. Without a doubt.
It is our destiny to become our mothers. Like, that's just how this works.
Mom, I love you. That would be the best.
Mom, I love you too. I hope you never find this podcast.
Oh, my mom's been listening. Love you.
I've been debating whether I'm gonna tell my mother about this.
So she gets a purple sticker again. I think this, like, another week has gone by, and she's all excited. And he booked the last appointment of the day this time, and this is where I got all high pitched and went, ee.
I know. I think the thing that I like most about this story is that it does capture that anticipation of, like, seeing a crush at work.
And getting excited about it.
And getting excited about it. Yes. Of, like, that, like.
Oh, my God. I can remember when I was substitute teaching, and I had the biggest crush on one of the other guys there. And, like, if I knew that I was going to be in the classroom that he was going to be in that day, it was, like, a big day for me. So, like, I can absolutely understand that, like, the anticipation of, like, I got to make sure I look nice today and whatever.
Yes.
So I get it.
There is something very, very special about a work crush. I don't know how else to describe it, but this book very successfully captures that anticipation, that high-pitched giddy feeling, and I felt it as Violet was feeling it, and I thought it was very
it gives
well
you
done.
Like that little extra pep in your step while you're at work for the day.
Yes.
So for sure.
Yes.
So the note I have is she'd always been a sucker for authority, eager to impress her professors and supervisors with quick compliance, and she suspected if this sharp-voiced minotaur barked an order for her to climb the short staircase and kneel before him, thick cock hanging obscenely over the unzipped fly of his pants, she'd have dropped to the ground without a moment of hesitation. I said, fuck, did I just get psychoanalyzed in a book about minotaurs?
You absolutely
the
did.
smutted for me in this book.
Yes. I could not agree more, despite the fact that I generally don't align with that need for authority in a sexual context. Like, I felt that this book did a very good job of walking the line for me.
It was good.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, like, I'm going to reveal so much about myself, but, like, the desire to do a good job. Like, the way I take mental notes to ensure that I am performing a task well, I felt like was pretty well captured by.
Your fiancé is a lucky man.
I'll tell him you said that.
So she says to him, maybe you're a good luck charm in this time slot, because he asks, like, has your day been better this time around than it was before? And she's like, yes, it has. Maybe you're a good luck.
He says, well, that's a relief. I'd hate to go back to the other place across town, but I'd be forced to make the sacrifice if you were still slipping on banana peels and missing files every week. And she said, I don't recall ever saying anything about banana peels. And he says, I used my imagination. In any case, I'm relieved to hear it that her day was better.
I, like, actually kind of love their flirting. And I hated that I loved it at this point in the story.
Because you're torn between, like, this is so inappropriate and this is so adorable.
Yes, like, their banter was very cute. It made me smile while I was reading it. It was very cute and very, like, I could see that in myself in that kind of, you know what I mean? Like, you forgot for a minute that he was a minotaur. Like, you could see it being, like, a cute, as you're first starting to get to know somebody and, like, flirting a little bit, still keeping it pretty, like, innocent, but yeah, for sure.
Yes. Yeah, it felt very realistic also. It did a good job of capturing that uncertainty of, like, this is banter. Is it flirting? Like, it feels like flirting. Is he actually interested? Or, like, are we just being witty at each other? Like, it does a good job of, like, capturing that the uncertainty and, like, the excitement and hope in that uncertainty, I felt.
He talks about how, like, there's a couple of other milking farms in the area. He said there's one in Bridgeton, which is the city where she lives, and she gets all excited. And she's like, I live in Bridgeton, and then realizes, like, oh, shit, I'm not supposed to tell anything personal about myself. Right. And then he's basically saying, like, any minotaur that you ask, if they say that they haven't done this, they're lying because everybody does it. He goes, family men, forget about it. How else would they be able to afford to take the kids to Blinksy Land?
I like
and
that
then
one.
may as well get paid for what's going down the shower drain every day. And I was like, it's a good way to think about it. Like, because he mentions basically that they've been commodified by humans anyway, so, like, if you're gonna, why not get paid for it? And again, after they start chatting, he's completely hard by the time he gets through the little, like, glory hole, if you will.
Well, so before that, I think there's a little interaction here that I enjoyed, and that comes up later. But he says, so just remember that the next time a minotaur tries chatting you up, ask which facility he uses. If he swears up and down he's never been to a place like this, run away because he's a liar. And then she replies, well, I can't say I have many conversations with minotaurs outside of work, but I'll keep that in mind. I mean, it's not like there are minotaurs falling over themselves trying to buy me drinks when I'm out and about. And so then later, when they run into each other in the real world, he's like, see, now you can say that minotaurs are buying you drinks.
I loved it.
It was so cute. I'm sorry. I can't help it.
So they're like still chatting while she's getting to work, and says, she goes, I was surprised to have gotten a request at all. I think I'm the only human here and thought my hands were going to be too small for them to even keep me on. Glad to know the personal touch makes up for it. Is that why you put the request in the first place? And he says, well, that and you do have those perfect tiny little hands. And I said, men of any species like a woman with small hands because it makes them feel bigger. No matter the actual size of what it is, men like small hands because it makes them feel bigger. Period.
Oh my God. I feel like every man on the planet just went, oh.
Yeah,
oh,
now they feel seen.
They felt a disturbance in the force.
Yeah, I see what they're doing here. So then she imagines what it would be like to be stretched by his girth. And I said, at what point does this become a conflict of interest?
True.
And I think they kind of talk about that. And as their relationship progresses, he stops going for a while to try to make it so there's not this conflict of interest, which is nice.
Yes.
Okay, so unfortunately, we're leaving you with yet another cliffhanger, just as things are starting to heat up between Violet and her Minotaur. Come back for part 2, where we'll meet some more key characters, discuss different interspecies relationships, and find out what Violet's been thinking all along. Is it gonna fit? And with that,
we're at our wits' end.
see you next time!